Today, my guest is Josh Connolly. He is the author of It's Them, Not You. And I'm happy to have a conversation with him today. And we're going to get into all sorts of topics that I think a lot of the people that follow me are going to find fascinating. And I'm happy to introduce them all to Josh if they don't already know him. But Josh, how are you today, sir?
I'm very good. Yeah, like you. I'm very much looking forward to the conversation. Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. So, what got you into the work that you do?
I mean, look, there's been a long journey there, but ultimately in the end, I think it was, the own work that I was doing on myself, that I was forced to do on myself ultimately in the end. And I think through that journey and starting to speak more publicly about it, I started sort of supporting charities a number of years ago, and sort of realized and was shown that I had a way of communicating my experiences. And so, yeah, once I started sharing sort of publicly, that was like a blog sort of a decade ago now, which is crazy. So yeah, they were more the medium of the time, a blog. And then, yeah, things just grew from there really to get to where I am today. I'm very grateful for it. I know that much. Yeah.
Awesome. And you also had addiction issues like I did. And why did you think you gravitated to drinking as you did?
I think, look, a lot of what I'm going to say here is retrospective, right? I mean, at the time, it didn't, I don't remember being a young kid and like I found drugs first, actually. It was cannabis was my sort of
Mm,
first love. We sort of smoked resin through like a water pipe at the age of like 12. But then alcohol quickly followed. And it never, like as a child, I wasn't like, oh, life's so hard, let me take drink and drugs. I just naturally gravitated towards the group of people that were doing that. I think you hear a lot of people say that I fell into the wrong crowd, but I sort of argue that I didn't fall anywhere. I went there. I went to that crowd because they were all, you know ultimately subconsciously seeking the same as me, which was escape. It was to get, I don't know if you say it over there, but here we say get out of our heads. I used to say I'm going to get out of my head tonight, and I didn't even know that that's what I was saying. But when I look back, that was exactly what I was doing. And my experience is that I loved it. I loved alcohol and drugs, right? And if I can go back to the 12-year-old that I was now, I think people think that I might say, oh, don't do it, don't go near the drink and drugs and stuff. But I don't know if I would say that, because I wasn't being offered anything else as a child to deal with the ways that I felt, right? And I don't know how I would have got through my teenage years without drink and drugs
mm,
and without the escape. Look, today's world's a little bit different. We didn't have like devices and ways of escaping into our devices. We didn't have that. The internet was sort of very new when I was young, and some people had it and some didn't, and it was like dial up and you could go on it for half an hour. You know what I mean? But so there wasn't like these other ways of escaping. And so, in some ways I've heard it said before, for some people, that alcohol gave them a life and then slowly took it away from them. And there's definitely something in that for me. As soon as there was consequences to my drinking, it clearly had become a problem.
mm.
But in the beginning, it was like, even at 13 years old, I went to school a week and just couldn't wait for the weekend to go and get drunk down the park and down the field, which is where we all drank and did drugs. And I couldn't wait. I loved it. It gave me a sense of being connected to the world. It made me become everything that I wanted to be, in terms of like socially, and like I let go, and you know, uh, there was an ease to the way that I lived life. So yeah, that's definitely what it gave me. Yeah,
Mm. And you had lost your father at a young age. How old were you when that happened?
I was about I was about 9 years old when I lost my dad. And look, that's sort of like my best guess. It's always very difficult to kind of get my timeline of my childhood, but I think it was 9 years old is where I land when I try and piece together the timeline of it. Yeah, and he was like an alcoholic, so
Mm,
he'd spent time in jail. He went to jail when I was like 5 years old and was in there for a couple of years. And then when he came out, you know, he wasn't good. He wasn't in a good, jail didn't fix him. Let's put it that way. I think he probably progressively got worse when he was in there still. And so yeah, my memories of him in my childhood are not great. It was a struggle. But again, like it's important for me to highlight, like that's looking back retrospectively. Like that's looking back through an adult lens. As a kid, it was just my normal. I just thought it was all very normal to me. I remember, I always say, I remember going around a friend's house for the first time when I was like 7 or 8 years old, a friend from school, and going into the house, and the mum and dad were just sat out, in the kitchen, having a cup of tea and just chilling and talking. And I remember as a kid thinking, whoa, what's going on here? Like there's something wrong in this house, because it was just calm and peaceful. And it was like, it was bizarre to me, So yeah, it's difficult to remember if I felt as a very young child, if I felt a lot of pain. But when I look back with certainly through the adult lens that I look back, I remember feeling a lot of that. Yeah.
And when that happened, like, how did it change for you? Like, because your mom, was she still with him at the time, or?
No, my mum separated from my dad before he went to jail, and then she had met my stepdad before that. So,
Okay.
So yeah, they weren't together, hadn't been together for a long time. We used to go and visit my dad on the weekends. He lived in like a little dingy apartment, and we would go every weekend or every other weekend to see him. And it wasn't nice. So I mean, like, to your question of like, how did it change? What did it do? I feel like I remember feeling like a sense of relief, really. Alongside the sadness, a sense of relief that it was sort of all over. Like I remember the confusion of it all, and like most separated couples, I guess, as well. Like, if I'm good to my dad, will it upset my mum? If I'm good to my mum, will it upset my dad? So there's all of that kind of stuff that goes on. But because of the way that he was drinking and stuff, I always felt like I wanted to protect my mum. I didn't want to let my mum know that I was struggling or anything like that. So I think the key thing is that you don't get to talk about it as a kid. Like, it was all sort of swept under the carpet, and everybody's just trying to act like it was, like everything was okay, and it wasn't there. And I think, look, that's why I've probably grown up to be a little bit like somebody who likes to expose stuff that's under the carpet. Because I'm like, as soon as I sort of feel like something's getting swept under the carpet, I don't feel safe. I want to let's get it out and deal with it, whatever it is, however bad it is. Let's get it out and deal with it.
That's great. I mean, and it takes a lot of work to get to that spot. I mean, how did you get to that spot where you're able to do that?
I think that's been like a long journey. Yeah. I think I've been sober for like over 13 years now. And I think, like, in the beginning, I still just did what I'd always done, which is try to create a character, try to create a persona that was likable. I would always work out who people wanted me to be as a classic sort of child of an alcoholic or child from a dysfunctional home. You don't be yourself. You be what you think people want you to be, so that they like you, because you don't want to risk being rejected. But I think there's been a few occasions since building a bit of a platform. The first podcast I ever had, I used to co-host with a friend of mine, and this was like maybe 5 years ago. And I think I said something on the podcast that I thought everybody would like. It was quite controversial, but I didn't really believe it myself, but I thought people would like it. And I got backlash. And I remember thinking, like, when people were like giving me backlash, I remember thinking, I just want to say, I don't even think I think it myself, like, you're probably right. So then I remember just thinking, I may as well just say what I actually think. And if I say what I actually think, at least if there's backlash, I can check myself and either back what I say, or go, okay, maybe you're right, I'm going to change my mind. So yeah, like a series of like moments of being humbled, I guess you would say, like constantly being humbled have brought me back to myself. And then, like you say, a lot of work, because I think, like, when you start to work on yourself, I'll give you an example, right? When I first started to work on myself, I used to make everybody laugh all of the time, right? That's how it was, one of my escapes. It was my main escape, you know, when things are bad, just make everybody laugh, pretend everything's all right, make a joke of everything, right? So then when I first started working on myself and realized what I was doing, I went the other way. And like, I didn't want to make people laugh. I felt like, oh
Interesting.
no, that's like a trauma response. I don't know, you know. And so I wouldn't make people laugh. And I became very serious, you know, and very like, you know, and over time you think, no, that's not who I am. It's also part of who I am. It's a great skill to make people laugh a lot. So that came back in, similar with like I have like a strong sort of fighter, warrior, whatever you want to call it, energy in me that, again, when integrated and used wisely and wow, is a great trait if it's part of who you are, right? So again, in more recent years, I've been able to sort of integrate that back in and feel like, no, some things are worth fighting for, and sometimes fighting, and I'm not talking about, you know, fisticuffs or violence. I'm talking about like the energy in which you fight with. So, and I realized that, you know, so it's just, and then you learn to, like, rather than reject these parts, you learn to sort of integrate them and bring them back into who you are, you know?
Absolutely. And to
Mm.
rewind a little bit, so you had basically drinking had ran its course for you, and then you started going to AA, right?
Hmm. Yeah. So originally, I went to AA when I first got sober. That was the first place somebody took me. It was actually somebody who was a member of another 12-step fellowship. And he was like, yeah, try AA. And yeah, look, listen, the absolute truth for me is that, like, that's where I got sober, man. So like, it worked for me, man, for a long time. And actually, in more recent times, you know, I've been through some pretty hard stuff more recently, and I know we were just chatting before, but I have started like just going again. I go like once a
Really?
week to, yeah, just to be around people in recovery in a very different way. I think my journey with it is like, I got fully in the boat and I was like, you got to do it this way. And I became very like, that this is how you do it, and very like over evangelical with it. And then, um, you know, I went every day for a long time. I had nothing else, man. And it, you know, there's a lot of, I owe my life to a lot of people in AA. And then I had like about a year or so where I stopped going, but would still say to people, go to AA if you want to get sober. And then more recently, yeah, I'm sort of back in there now, like once a week, being around people in recovery. And it's kind of, yeah, just being in people. I think it's useful for somebody like me to just be around people that know what it's like to try and fight to not drink, you know. Not that I don't feel like, you know, it's been a long time since I felt like having a drink. People often ask me, do you miss it? And I say, like, I don't miss it. I miss the ability to just escape myself for the night.
Mm,
You know what I mean? But like, it was never like that for me, right? In the end, I never just escaped for a night. And like I always sort of say, if I felt like I could still do it and it's just escape for one night and then go back to my normal life, I'd probably still do it because I wouldn't have a problem with it. You know what I mean? But it's never like that for me. So I know I'll never, you know, it's never going to be for me. But yeah, man, I guess I got humbled into that again in many ways.
no, that's fascinating. I mean, and I agree with what you said, because I do think AA and NA, they will get people clean if they do the suggestions. That's the big if,
Yeah,
right? If they don't do
yeah.
the suggestions, then it won't go too far. But what did you learn from AA, and what did you think about your experience there? And I guess since you're going back now, what do you think about it now?
I think I think that I needed to do more. So I think the 12 steps themselves, for anybody who doesn't know what the 12 steps are, I actually think they're a great process of like accepting that you can't control everything in the world, which is like, believe that you can't do it. You know, it's not you, you're not the one in charge type thing. And then, you know, the amends process and sharing your story and freeing yourself from it. I think the 12 steps is a wonderful program. Like, I genuinely do think that. And I think it's a great way to get sober. I think like any peer-to-peer community or any organization that grows, it is susceptible to cult-like behaviors from people. It's susceptible to housing people that are toxic or narcissistic or whatever you want to call them. And I think, look, I think this about any organized spiritual organization. I think it's true of any spiritual, from religion, 12 steps, new age spirituality. Like, I've got a community. I have to, work really, really, really hard to make sure that that doesn't fall foul to it. I think it happens with all of them. Like, if I look at all religions, take, Christianity, like the Muslim faith, Sikhism, like, take any of them, at their core, what they're all about is about bringing people together and about like hope and love and all of that sort of stuff. But they are always susceptible to horrible people congregating there and distorting what they're about, because I actually posted about this recently online, but I was like, if I'm a toxic, horrible person who needs a supply, who lives off of a supply, right? If my life is about how do I find people to use as a supply for my own sense of self, I'm going to go 12 steps, or I'm going to go to a church, or I'm going to go to a mosque, right? Because there'll be a bunch of vulnerable people there for sure, and I'll find somebody to use as a supply. So, like, I think, like everything, they can fall foul to that. And I think that's why sometimes I find it hard to be, quote unquote, in the middle of the boat of any of them, because then I just think you fall foul to these kind of dogmatic tendencies that happen. And listen, when I was like 3 or 4 years sober for a few years, I was about as dogmatic as they come. And my truth, when I'm being really dogmatic in those instances, it normally means I feel fragile about the beliefs that I'm holding. So
that's some good insight.
Yeah. Even when I look at, like, in 12 steps, you work towards a relationship with God or a higher power or something bigger than yourself. And listen, I believe that I am not in control of what goes on in the world, right? That's as probably deep as my belief is today, right? Having it kind of that open, for me, is amazing, right? Because I'm like, I could sit in front of somebody who deeply believes in Sikhism, and I could listen to them and be like, yeah, man, I like this thing and that thing makes sense. And like, I can see how you can conceptualize that. Like, but there's been times in my life when I'm like, this is what God is, right? And when I'm doing that, me personally, I'm not suggesting this is true for everybody, but me personally, I'm lost. So I'm creating something very fixed and simple to hang my hat on, because that's what makes me feel comfortable in that moment.
I mean, that makes sense to me. I mean, they say, trust those that are seeking the truth and doubt those who claim to have found it. I think there's a humility in that kind of thinking. And I agree with you about the programs. I would never tell somebody not to go, because I do think it does save some lives. There's a few things I don't like about it, though. I don't like you're always so sick and one's too many, 1,000's never enough. I kind of think those things become true the more you say them to yourself. So, like, maybe someone that gets clean or sober another way, maybe one is not too many, and they could be able to like manage somehow. But if you go to AA and you tell yourself constantly, one's too many, 1,000's never enough, then it kind of becomes true. And they also have those as minor cult-like elements, I guess I would say, right? Of all the cults, it's not the worst, right? It's some minor stuff, and they give you some us versus them, like the normies and then the addicts, the normies and the alcoholics. So those are the three things that I would say that, all right, a little iffy, but overall, when it comes to saving lives and you look at the problem you're going there for, okay, a little bit of cult elements maybe isn't the worst thing.
Yeah, and like in many, and I totally agree with you, by the way, on all of the reflections. And I wonder if in my early days, that's exactly what I needed. Like, I needed to believe that I was, like, in many ways, I sort of feel like maybe like I am. I don't think I'll ever be able to drink normally, because I just can't use any. I can't still now today seem to use anything that feels good. Like, I can't seem to use any of it like in a healthy way. So the first true love that was alcohol, I just can't see that I'll ever be able to do it. So like, look, whether there's truth in that or not, but I do believe, you know, I agree with you that the whole like believing I'll always be sick, I certainly don't like that, or believing that I'm always gonna be powerless over everything. You know, like, I've got a lot of power in my life today, and if you don't think that people can hold power, get in a relationship with someone abusive, and you'll realize that power is everywhere. Power dynamics really do exist. And actually, you know, I've built a platform today, so I can tell you now that with the platform that I've got comes power, and I need to fucking know that, right? And if I just claim I'm powerless and then actually I'm a dangerous person to other people then, because I think we need to be aware of where we have more power. We need to be aware of where the power structures are and where we sit in them, so that we can challenge ourselves to make sure that we don't abuse them, you know, because there is power there. You know, when somebody is in a position of power, tells you they're powerless, fucking, for me, I think that's a red flag, man. Do you know what I mean? Because they're not aware of their power. They're not aware of their power. So yeah, like, as somebody that's really like believes in power dynamics and the influence of power dynamics and the misuse of power dynamics, like the whole, you know, when I hear people say I'm powerless over everything, I don't know how good an idea that is. But when I was a year sober, I don't know, man. Maybe it was exactly what I needed to believe. I don't know, man. Like, you know, who am I at 13 years sober to say that, you know, the very thing that certainly it was only AA and 12 steps, almost solely AA 12 steps, that kept me sober for at least the first 5-6 years, you know? So yeah, like I'm always a little bit wary of doing it down, and I agree with the things that you've said, man. And anybody that can't have a balanced conversation about it, again, it's dogma, isn't it? Right?
Yeah.
That, you know what I mean? I think that it's the things that I do now to keep me well. All of those will have faults in them, and all of them as well. So, you know, I've done enough of picking things up and it working and then it not working to know that, yeah, I need to try and keep my options open as much as possible, you know what I mean? And never close the door on anything. Not that I know that's not what you're doing. So yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
open-minded. They say wisdom requires a flexible mind. And so that's what I try to strive for myself. And now that I've mentioned the negative parts of it, like you, I think it saved my life, for one. It was a necessary part of my journey because it was my first insight into self-awareness. It was my first insight into admitting I had a problem with anything, being able to admit I'm wrong about something. It gave me some community. It made me realize how self-centered I had been and how little I thought about anyone else before I did or said anything. And that was the beginning of it. Like, that was the start of that self-awareness journey.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really needed to start looking at myself, you know, at the beginning of certainly of my addiction. I need to look at myself and my actions and stuff like that. But again, that goes too far as well. And then, you know, I hear lots of occasions when people are like, you know, they've got a sponsor telling them to look for their part in abuse and stuff like that. And I'm like, yeah, no, you don't have there is no part. If somebody abuses you when you are a child, you do not play a part in that. No. I don't care what anybody says, you know. So yeah, look, or not everything, but like most things, I'm with you, man. There's good and bad there, right? And you do have to like have that kind of that open mind that you talk about, you know, and that willingness to be curious and try things. And actually, what I think everybody should be is skeptical, right? I think everybody should be a skeptic, right? Because people will often say, oh, I'm a skeptic. But what they actually mean when they say I'm a skeptic and they use it in that way is I'm closed-minded and I don't like to try things. A true skeptic, if you're truly skeptic, you're a true skeptic, you'll try everything, right? But you will make your mind up only once you've tried it and see if it works for you. So, you know, we should all be skeptical. You should be skeptical of everything, right? You should go in with an open mind. This might work, this might not work. But what I'm going to do is really lean into myself and make sure I'm being honest with myself about whether it does or doesn't. I'm not falling into doing it because somebody else thinks I should or anything like that, you know? We should all be skeptical of everything.
Right. And I think the center of the bullseye for you now is authenticity, if I had to guess. But
Hmm.
what would you say your mission is right now?
My mission, look, on a broad level, my mission is to help people see the truth. So that, I guess, that is rooted in authenticity. And again, we spoke just before we came on about the definition of authenticity. Now, it I, I am probably butchering slightly a version that Gabor Mate says, but that is when you understand what you're feeling, and then you know what you need as a result, and then you're able to communicate it, right? So that authenticity piece is really, really important. But I think truth really matters, man. When I look at like the struggles that I had throughout my childhood, a lot of them were rooted in me citing the truth and adults not being able to cope with it.
Mm.
And so making me wrong. And so I was very confused all of the time. And I think if there's one thing that gets me triggered into a bit of an activated state now, it's when I'm debating with somebody who uses the tactic of just pretending that they're not hearing what I'm saying, or skewing it and changing it to something else because they don't want to listen to the truth. And I just see that all of the time. And I think everyone deserves the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it makes people feel, and that's why a lot of my work ends up in the space of dealing with, toxic and dysfunctional people and systems, because they're rooted in truth avoidance.
Mm. And you use the word toxic parents instead of narcissistic parents. Is there a reason
Hmm.
why you do that?
Yeah. When you look at the term narcissism or narcissistic, right, it's the Western medical sphere has taken it, right? So if you say narcissistic, people will say, um, you know, that are you qualified to diagnose that? And so it's kind of been hijacked, I think, by the medical sphere. And then I think people get bogged down in terminology and like, are they a narcissist, or are they like, is it this or is it that? And I'm like, listen, if somebody's horrible to you, then they're horrible to you. Like, I don't know why we need to I don't know why it needs to be truly defined. I don't know why we've now created this world where it's like, are they really horrible? How horrible are they? Can you I'm just like, there's enough. I don't think, by the way, you're supposed to like everybody. I don't think everybody is supposed to like you or me or anyone, right? I don't think that's the way that the world works. And so maybe I'm experiencing some people as being horrible because they're not my person. But ultimately, if I experience them as being horrible, like, why would I try and have them in my life? Now, it's slightly different if it's like people that I've already have a relationship with, then maybe I want to do some work and just check what's going on here. But ultimately, there's enough good people in the world to stop this kind of let's try and love everybody stuff. Because listen, my belief is, and I think it's a fact, when you look across the world, there's good and bad people. If there wasn't, the world would be like, some of the most biggest atrocities in our lives wouldn't have happened, because they're driven by horrible people. So I think this whole sometimes if we say narcissistic person, I think it just gives a way of toxic people arguing their way out of something, because one of the tactics you'll find if you have a discussion with a horrible toxic person, whatever you want to call them, is they'll get you arguing and debating about a bunch of stuff, to even just as a way of deflecting and steering away. That's why I always just go, are they horrible? Like, are they horrible to you? Yeah. Are they always horrible to you? Yeah. Do they ever self-reflect and even give a tiny bit of self-reflection? No. Well, then they're horrible. They're toxic. And some people say, I even get a lot of people debate me, is anybody really toxic? Or is it just their behaviors that are toxic? And I'm like, if it looks like a duck and sounds like a duck, let's call it a duck, man. If you want to say people that are toxic instead of toxic people, you say it. But I think I think if I'm horrible to you all the time and you label me as toxic and horrible, the only person that needs to have a look at what's going on is me, not you. You know, it's not your labeling that's the issue here, is it? It's the fact that I'm toxic and horrible all the time. So,
Right.
yeah, that's where I'm at with it. And I know some people don't like that, and it's uncomfortable for some people, but yeah, you know, I spent a lot of my life having my truth as a kid tore down or made to be wrong. So today I'm just like, this is my truth. So take it or leave it, people, you know.
I love that. I mean, I think there's a benefit because, like you said, it's the behaviors that matter, not the
Hmm.
labels of these people that do these behaviors. It's like, does it really matter if they're a narcissist, a borderline, a psychopath, or just an asshole if they're treating you terribly? I say it doesn't change your solution.
No.
So focus on those behaviors. And I think, like you said, I think there's pros and cons of using the word narcissist. I think on one hand, it can sometimes help people find the space. I think that's the benefit. But the negatives would be, like you said, it derails the conversation sometimes. Oh, narcissism's so rare, or they'll fight with you about the definition of it, or everyone's a little narcissistic. And that's just taking you away from where the work needs to be done. And that's one of the
Mm,
things I like so much about your book is you talk about the toxic behaviors of parents in particular, but that's really only a quarter to half of the book there. The rest of it is us, like working on how we're handling things. And you're big into breath work. So maybe you could talk a
mm.
little bit about breath work too.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said what you just said, because so many people tell me that like all I do is talk about the problem, and I'm like, you don't know the work that
Yeah.
I do if that's what you think, man. Like, I'll highlight the problem because I think that's important too. But like, you know, I talk a lot about like how we work on ourselves and how can we take responsibility for who we are today, you know. And for me, like, breath work changed my life when I found it. I mean, like, I think I was somewhere, you know, I don't know, like 6 years into sobriety, I was an expert at telling you about who I, you know, why I was the way that I was. I could talk about it till the cows come home. I could give an amazing seminar on it. Um, but the truth was is that I'd never really felt it, not in my body. Never had I truly gone to the emotions. And when I discovered breath work, it changed that for me, you know, and somatic work of any kind. And when I say somatic work, I'm talking about soma, the body. So just work that gets you in your body. Um, can be life changing. It certainly was and is life changing for me. And I think that um, in Western culture, at least, we're so up in our heads, rationalizing, trying to make sense of things through the rational lens and like trying to make sense of things that way. I think we lose sight of how much truth is in our body, you know, and how much sometimes I just need to have a cry and let it go. And so for me, even like, I've been such a chronic people pleaser all my life, right? So if I go to talking therapy, and I'm not saying people shouldn't do talking therapy, right? I do one-to-one coaching myself, right? That's rooted in talking, right? So like I've been to therapy, I still use therapy. I had a recent batch of therapy with an IFS therapist that was amazing, right? But I'm also aware that it's only one side of the coin. And if you're a chronic people pleaser like me, I can get lost in just trying to make the therapist happy. So the
Mm.
therapist will ask me a question, I'll work out why they've answered it, why they've asked me it, give them the most amazing answer that I can think of. They'll think, wow, he's having a breakthrough. They'll ask me another question, I'll give them another brilliant answer. They leave the session thinking, wow, this was amazing. We had so many breakthroughs, and it's not really touched me. I've just been playing to the gallery, you know? And I
Mm.
fall into doing that all of the time. It's no, you know, it's part of why I do speaking, because I'm like good at that. But being good at talking about emotions is nowhere, is not even connected to being good at doing emotions. Not really. There might be a connection there, I'm sure there is. But so doing work like soma work, like breath work in my instance, which is I do a lot of conscious connected breathing, which is deep breaths through the mouth, normally connected in their way. And they bring about big experiences. They bring you into your body in a way people haven't experienced before. And I've been delivering them all over the world now for a number of years, and people have had massive experiences. And what's crazy is like one session can bring about so much release. You know, it's not a magic fix, right? I'm not here to tell you that, you know, if you do breath work, then all your problems will go away. It feels like it when you're in the breath work, that's for sure. But you know, Eventually you have to come back round and go back out into the big bad world, and you realize that all your problems are still there. So it's not a magic fix, but it can definitely help us clear the mind, quieten the mind at least, so that we can do some of that, some of that internal work. Yeah.
So in a way, do people normally breathe wrong, would you think? Like maybe they're breathing shallow but what's a demonstration of that or an example of breath work?
Well, look, so the breath work that I do is about manipulating your breath in a certain way, right? So that you have an experience. So it will help you with your lung capacity. But the breath work that I do is about bringing about an experience. But to your point, people normally breathe shallow and through the mouth because that's where we breathe when we're in our stressed state. So most of us are in a stressed state. So to realize what I mean by that, if you and everybody listening takes a deep breath in through your nose, and then a long exhale through your mouth, you go, whoa, I don't know when the last time I did that was,
Yeah.
and you do 3 of them and you'll realize you change your state straight away. You very quickly come back into your rested system. So, the more that you focus on your breath, and the more that you can start to realize just how much you can change your state through your breath. So in the same way that we just did a deep breath in through the nose and out through the mouth, and you feel yourself calm even with just one breath, if you do a deep breath through the mouth and like let it go, and then go straight into another one, so you go you do 3 of them and you go, wow, and like I've come like lightheaded and it's changed my state again, right? And that's so when you start to realize just how much we can change our states through the breath, you realize that, wow, there's a whole world out here of things that I can try, and it can be life-changing in terms of like, I always know that when I'm starting to feel stressed and up in my head too much, there's simple techniques that I can use that bring me down back into my body, or fire my system up in the way that they need to, and can have a real big impact on me, and it's crazy to think that just focusing on our breath in new ways can bring about such profound experiences.
I mean, I think it helps us to get present as well. It just centers us, gets us present. And then we're not worrying as much about the future or depressed about the past as maybe Eckhart Tolle would say, right? Where I think that's one of the benefits. It gets us in the now, where at
Yeah.
least we can handle things. We're back in our bodies now, which I think is great. And when you were talking about people pleasing there, you reminded me of what you said in the book. You had said there's a big difference between being liked and being likable. Could you explain that?
Listen, I spent my whole life trying to be likable, man. And I still do it, right? I still get caught up in that. How do I get you to like me? Being likable means what I do is I work out who you need me to be. I try and read you. I intuitively lean into you. I've got a high sense of sensitivity, so I'm quite good at it. So I do all of that, leaning into you, being like finding out what you want me to be, and then I just be that, right? The problem is that I might become likable. I might get a big social circle. I might get lots of people to like me, but none of it is based on who I am. It's all at the expense of who I am, because I'm distorting myself to please you. So in order to be liked, I have to try and figure out who I am and who I truly am and be that. The problem with that is that some people won't like me. Right? Because they won't like who I am. They won't like the way that I show up. They won't like the true version of me. And I have to get comfortable with that.
Yeah.
And like I do think that the personal development space, self-help space, spirituality space, if we're not careful, it's just teaching people pleasing through a slightly different and new lens, like how do you make yourself likable in a new way? Because true spirituality is to be myself, is to be the essence of who I am. And if I'm truly doing that, some people won't like me because I'll speak my truth, and some people won't like that truth. And so actually being liked is about speaking my truth. It's about being who I truly am. Because then if you do like me, by the way, because I just talked a lot about that people won't, but the people that do like me, they like me.
Yeah.
And I don't have to hide around them. I can be myself because I know that you like who I am. And that's the difference. And look, one of the things that I've learned from being more and more like that in my life is that your social circle shrinks. Yeah, because you're not likable anymore. You're you. But the smaller circle that you have is people that you know that truly like you. Then you know that they're people that you can ring up and go, listen, man, I fucking messed up. I've done something that I'm not very proud of. Help me be a better person. Help me get through this. Help me change. And they won't go, whoa, hang on a minute. One of the reasons I liked you is because you never mess up. And you're like always funny, always happy, and and who is this guy that's turned up sad, you know? So your circle shrinks, but it's a powerful, you know, you're building true connection and true friendship then.
And I think that's where the courage comes in, because I think a lot of people are good at being themselves when they know other people agree with what themselves are. But then the real courage is when actually your opinions or what you really think, people are going to disagree with you, especially people in your group. That's where, that's where that takes a lot of courage, because now you risk, what are they going to think about me if I disagree about this?
Yeah. And you're going to be uncomfortable for people. That's the reality, you know, because if you're in a group of 3 or 4 people and they all go, oh, I believe this thing. And then they go, what about you? And you go, no, I don't think so. I think you're wrong. This is what I think. Sometimes people don't like that. It's like, why don't you just go along with the mold? Why don't you, we're all agreeing. Why don't you just agree? And it's hard, man. It takes courage to be an outlier. You know, it takes courage to go against the grain. But, you know, I always say that most of the best things that have ever happened throughout the history of society have been driven by outliers, by people who said, I don't want to conform anymore. I don't think this is right. And so they stood up. And at the beginning, they were always hated. At the beginning, everybody went against them. And so sometimes to stand up for what you believe is right means to be ostracized, you know? And you know, I even see it a little bit now with this Oprah thing that's come out, you know? There's some people that are like venomly, like, you know, this is a trend and we're on it. But there's also now loads of people that, like, I'm starting to even see people that I think would have fought back against me a couple of years ago now coming out going, yeah, it's not a trend. This, you know, she shouldn't be saying that. And you're like, oh.
What did she say, by the way? I still didn't watch it. What did she say?
I've not seen it. So the actual podcast itself, I thought she was just the host. So I think she tried to stay as neutral as she could. And I didn't get too much non-neutrality from her. If I'm staying completely calm and completely like in my body, when I watched it, I think she said some things for both sides, which is normally what an interviewer is supposed to do. But she did release a video on Instagram where, and the reel on Instagram was awful. She just said, oh, my friend like had an amazing relationship with her daughter, and they went out for dinner the other week and everything was fine. And then her daughter's just cut her off out of the blue. She wrote her a letter and just cut her off. And she said, and my friend was so surprised, she sent the police round there to check if everything was okay, because she thought she must have been kidnapped. And she was like, and it turns out, no, she wasn't. She had just cut contact with her. And she was like, my friend asked me, is this like a thing, you know? Have you heard about this? And she was like, and I said, wow, you know, I'd seen it. But then I looked and I was like, wow, yeah, this trend is there's definitely a trend here, this trend of people estranging from their parents. And she said, so go and watch the podcast. And I just thought that is one of the most fucking bizarre things I've ever seen, you know? So look, maybe I feel like when she did the reel, they said, do a reel and promote the podcast. And that was when she was in her real self. And then, you know, when she did the podcast, it's all very curated and she's thinking about what she's doing. Maybe that's a bit harsh, but the reel that she did was, I mean, it upset a lot of people, and I'm not surprised, because it was so flippant about such a sort of difficult subject for many people.
So what was in your body? What were you thinking as you were watching that?
The reel. When I watched the reel, I was like, I think I made, you know, when I made my own reel about it, I was like, oh, like, not you as well. Like, you know, not you as well. So the reel was terrible, but I know enough now to know, go gather some information, go have a look before you start going crazy at her, go and find out. So I went straight and watched the podcast. And as I say, I felt the voices of everybody were platformed on there quite well. I did think that. And I would actually argue it's probably the best public discussion on it I've seen, in terms of like, they had kids on there who were estranged, they had adults on there who were estranged and, you know, blaming the kids, and they had 3 experts on there, and I thought 2 of the experts were great. So not so much the other one, but that's because he sits on a different side of my opinion, you know, whereas the other 2 sit pretty much on the same side as mine. So yeah, I thought it was a really good podcast. All things considered, yeah.
And I mean, what I would think about it, I think really depends on the individual situation. But I
Mhm.
have seen a lot of toxic parents that act like they just have no idea what they've done. I have no idea what I've done, but my kid has cut me off. I don't know why. And it's like,
Yeah,
well, no one screams the loudest than a toxic parent that just claims to have no idea why they got cut off. It's like, if you look, unless you have zero self-awareness, a lot of times I think you know. Now,
yeah.
on the other side, I do think there can be toxic kids too that turn into toxic adults. I mean,
Mhm.
all toxic adults were once toxic kids.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that can also be a thing sometimes. But again, just the attitude of, well, maybe all these people shouldn't be cutting off their parents. It's like, you really can't say that. You can't say that without knowing what their situation is. If you look at their situation and you hear it, maybe that's the best thing for them. And that's how they're not going to self abandon as a
Yeah.
kid. They cut them off. And if that's what they think the best thing to do for them is, I'm all for it.
Yeah. And listen, I haven't seen anybody, right, online, and they've never come to me, and I'm sort of waiting to meet them. Adult children don't cut their parents for nothing. I've never ever seen an example where it's for nothing, right? Where everything is just rosy and it's completely fine, and something switches in their brain. And so when a parent is going, no, it's nothing, nothing's happened, it was amazing, I'm like, that's a red flag. Now, so even the one they had on Oprah, right? She's like, yeah, she just cut me. I got no idea why. And then they were like, what reason did she cite? And then they were like, she goes, she just didn't get her own way.
Hmm.
And I'm like, you're not speaking the truth here. Now, if I hear the parent in front of me go, yeah, look, we had a strained relationship. I was not great, you know. But I feel like she wasn't, or he wasn't, or they weren't great either. And it was complex, and we had a difficult relationship, and there was lots that happened. And I'm trying to be the best I can be. And like, that's different. An estrangement is complex, and it happens for many different reasons. Yeah. But it never happens for nothing. Parental alienation is a thing, but that's not nothing, is it? Like, there's a story, there's a back journey here. So whenever anybody says my kids cut me off for no reason at all, I'm like, sounds like a you thing to me. You know, it sounds like a you thing to me. And all of the people that I meet that have estranged their parents, tell me a big, long, complex story behind it. And you know what? Most of them talk about a lifetime of blaming themselves. So, so I don't know, man. Like, listen, there's echo chambers. I appreciate I exist in one, and everybody exists in one. But this whole idea that it happens for no reason and it's a trend, right? It's just not true, man. It's not true, and it's offensive. And listen, a bunch of people came on my platform and were like, in the comments going, oh, I just think trend just means it's on the rise. And I'm like, don't pretend that there's not meaning in words, right? Don't pretend that going this trend, which is what people say, this trend, right? It's different if we're sitting down and we're going, look, it does feel like there is a trend where of things on rising. It feels like there is a trend, an upward trend. I haven't seen anybody say it like that, apart from when they've originally said it, well, it's just a trend, a TikTok trend. And then they go, oh, no, this is what I meant by trend. I meant that it's rising. That's just classic toxic person not taking accountability for the first way that you said it, you know? And this, I see people a lot trying to pretend that, oh, you're just taking my words out of context. You're projecting an energy onto my words. And I'm like, nah, I know when I've done that. Like, or I'm willing enough to have a look at myself and think, have I done that? But I'm not having it. And that's what toxic people are very clever at doing, by the way, is like this sort of subtle manipulation of half truths and never quite saying anything really bad, but saying it in a way and delivered in a way that is bad. But then when you say it's bad, they can just start arguing about semantical stuff rather than going, yeah, sorry, man, that, my tone and the way that I said that wasn't good,
Right. I mean, and how people frame these things matters. They could easily say, well, there's a trend of people respecting themselves. But they
Yeah.
didn't say that. They say,
No.
no, estranging. And I think
Yeah.
the way the toxic parents even talk about it, there's a lack of humility a lot of times where they'll say, I have no idea. Where if you had some humility, you would say, you know what? Apparently I messed up. Like, apparently I messed up. If my kid thinks I've been that bad to cut me off, I want to try to work on this. I want to try to like make this work. Hey, communicate with me without any judgment. What's on your mind? Tell me. And just be open-minded about it without attacking them, without lashing out the second you hear something you don't agree with. And part of this I learned back in AA and NA, because there's a lot of both sides of that equation, I think, in those rooms. So there's an alcoholic. Yeah, he's pissed off, or she's pissed off a lot of his family members. And what do they tell him? They say, you do the next right thing, have humility, don't blame other people, take responsibility for what you've done. And then when you keep on doing the next right thing, the right things generally happen for you. But that's what you don't see when in those parents' discussions there. You see blame, I have no idea, a lack of accountability, where if they just had that humility going in, I think that would go a far way. And if you had that humility, chances are they wouldn't be getting estranged from the kids if they had that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I've got kids, right? I've got adult children, right? 2 of my kids are adults now. Like my eldest is 19, second is 18. If they were to ever go no contact with me, right? I wouldn't be like, they've gone no contact with me, nothing. They didn't get away. I'd be like, something catastrophic has happened, right? They're not speaking to me. The first thing I'm doing, right, if they're not engaging with me at all, is I'm going to therapy. I'm going to sitting in a room with someone and I'm saying, I need to like look over everything. Yeah. And then maybe I do, let's say worst case scenario, it's been 5 years now and I've been in therapy the whole 5 years. If I was to be interviewed publicly about it, I would be like, look, I'm talking publicly about it because I want to try and raise awareness, but I want to know what I've done. I want to know how I can put it right. I'm aware they may never speak to me again, right? But I will live the rest of my life trying to figure out what it is that I need to do. If it's me, if it's them, if it's the relationship that they're in, I'm devastated. I will spend the rest of my life devastated, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to figure out why. And I will always remain open to looking at myself, right? I just, and I that is what I would be like. I know that I would be like that. And not least because if my kids get to adulthood and they are a toxic person, right, and they're horrible to me, I would feel like I've failed for the rest of my life. I will feel like I've failed. I will. Like, don't get me wrong, at some stage I would have to think I've got to try and live my life, but I wouldn't be like, I've got to live my life now. So if they want to fucking carry on being like that, that's up to them. But I'd be like, you know what? I'm trying to live my life. I'm trying to I'm living with a sense of living grief that I don't have a relationship with my child who's still alive. And I will grieve that for the rest of my life. And I'm going to try and live because it's been so long. So like, I just don't understand these like the other versions that you see, and then they want compassion and empathy from people. Like, I just don't get it, man. It doesn't, I don't buy it. That's what it is. I don't buy it. So yeah,
I'd say I think 90% of the time I don't buy it. I think there can be a small percentage of the time that there is a kid of theirs that might be a little bit toxic, and then they act out, because I do think that's a thing. I think there's a thing. I don't think it's a majority of the cases, by the way. I think, but occasionally, and I've talked to some of these parents, and at least from what they say, their kids are
Mhm.
a little out of pocket. And so it's like, okay, what do you do as the parent? And that's a situation that nobody wants to be in as a parent, right? No one wants to be in a situation where the kid's really out of control. But again, look at the addiction piece. That's another good analogy of it. So you're a parent and the kid's going off the rails with drugs or alcohol. That's a tough
Mhm.
spot, right? So what do you do in that spot as a parent? Where do you have boundaries? Where's tough love? Like, and maybe that's a good thing to go over even. Now, like if you have a kid who's struggling with alcoholism or addiction, what would you say to those parents in that
Yeah,
case?
yeah. It's a really good example. Yeah, really, really good example. I would say that you need to love yourself and do everything that you can to look after yourself and to do what's right by you, and let them know that when they are ready, if they're ever ready, you are there with open arms, ready to do whatever work they feel like they need to do. Yeah. If it was my kid and they've got addiction, and addiction's in my family, right? And I've got 6 kids. So, like, I'm not stupid. I'm not naive, right? My kids are young, right? My 2 eldest are adults. I've got 2 teenagers, and then I've got 2 below the age of 10, right? The rule of thumb says this might be something that I have to navigate at some point in my life, right? But would I be coming to you going, well, one of them's ended up an alcoholic, the other 5 didn't, so can't be anything I'm doing, and I've got to live my life at the end of the day, and they're horrible. It won't be like that. It'll eat away at me. It'll eat away at me, and I will have to take measures, and I will, have to try and look after myself. I will have to navigate the really, really difficult situation, awful situation, like that happens to a lot of people. The best that I can. And me personally, every time they looked like they were willing to do some work, I would do whatever it was. I would go and sit in a therapy room with them and let them lever everything at me, all of my failures. I'd do it. I'd do it once. I'd do it twice. I'd do it a million times. Every time they came and said, I'm ready, I would do it. I wouldn't be out there going, well, they're just, one of the 6 were toxic. So what can you do? They're horrible. Like, I feel a sense of accountability and responsibility to my children for the rest of my life, for the very fact that I brought them into this world. Now, like you say, they become an addict and they are bringing things to my home, police to my home and stuff like that. I will have to have clear boundaries, all of that. But I'll never stop feeling accountable and responsible. Never. And I'll never stop trying, in some way. And sometimes that will be boundaries of like, you're not welcome at the home. You can't come to the home when you're on drugs or drinking. You can't do that. Yeah, I can't have police at my door. I've got other people to think of and all of that sort of stuff. But when you're ready, and if that's because you've been arrested and you're going to prison for the rest of your life, you can phone me and I'll be there and I'll sit in a room with you and I'll support you no matter what it means for me, because I brought you into this world and you didn't ask me to bring you into this world. Now, I'll caveat all of that by saying I have enough humility to know I ain't in that situation yet, right? And if it does come, and when it does come, you might get me back on and I might change my mind about everything. And I might, because I know I've been around long enough to know sometimes I need to change my mind. But I'll never stop accountability and feeling responsibility for my kids, mate, ever.
And I think as we mature and get older, I would always tell people more in recovery, err on the side of too much accountability. But at the same point, like I look back at my addiction story, for example, and my parents played a part in that. There was a lot of invalidation, guilting, shaming, and just not being able to be myself around them. But having that balancing act of, okay, what was my stuff versus what was their stuff? But all I
Mm-hmm.
can do is work on my side of the street, right? I can't, if I have an addiction issue, I have to figure that out regardless of what my parents did. So it's a
Mm-hmm.
balancing act, though, too, right? I think in this space, some people get a little iffy around anything accountability wise. It can seem invalidating, I guess, in some cases, because in the abusive situations, right? I want to stress that's never the person who's being abused fault, right? That's not their
Mm-hmm.
fault.
Mm-hmm.
However, there does come a point down the line where if someone's in an abusive relationship, they get out. I do think stage 2, just like in your book, is look looking at our side of the street. Where can we grow? Where can we do better? Maybe we ignored some red flags. Maybe we didn't want to be alone and that's why we did. But
Mm,
recognizing that's not blame. That's
mm,
just trying to improve what we can improve. So that balancing act of, okay, this was the truth. This was their stuff. This is my stuff. This is what I need to do to grow.
mm. Yeah. And like, you know, we can always work on ourselves, right? We can always try, we should all of us should always look every day. How do I be a good person today? Right? That's what I want to do. How do I be a good person? Right? Sometimes being a good person is just getting through the day. Sometimes being a good person is like fighting against what's going on. And but of course, we all have to take accountability and responsibility for who we are in the world today, right? And realize that all of us at some point in our lives can fall victim to anybody. You know, life goes south, man. Like, I know that. I've been cruising along, cruise control, you know, and then I get myself in a horrible, awful situation, you know. So like you're right in that sense. There's nuance and there's balance to it. And like you say, but when somebody's in it, like, and by the way, the first piece of work that most people skip or is often skipped is when you've been a victim to really realize that you were a victim.
Mm.
And that's a big skip, a big part that a lot of the personal development world and spirituality world wants to skip. They just want to go, no. It's not, you know, everyone's love and light. Nobody's good or bad. We're all love and light at our core.
Oh,
They were just coming from a place of trauma, all that. And for me, you know, that's bullshit. Like,
yeah.
in order to move through victimhood, you have to first realize if you realize you were a victim. Otherwise, you're bypassing and it's coming out of you sideways. And the way it comes out of a lot of people sideways is by getting angry with people that are emotionally literate and able to realize the full range of emotions. Because if you're bypassing some of your emotions, you're going to get angry with people that are comfortable with them all.
And we see a lot of that, don't we? We see a lot of that spiritual gaslighting, I call it, or spiritual invalidation. Oh, that's just your ego talking. But this is why you like titled the book the way you did. It's
Mm,
them, not you, because I agree. It's absolutely essential to understand what you went through. You need to
mm,
see it clearly. And you laid it out very clearly, a lot of the toxic behaviors and ways toxic parents will act. And I think that aspect in particular will be extremely helpful for people that just are unfamiliar. They don't know what happened to them. They just think it's their fault. Oh,
yeah.
whatever it is, it's my fault. My parents
Yeah.
tell me it's my fault, so it must be my fault. And they self-abandon, they people
Hmm.
please, they try to jump through their hoops. They do all the things that people that have been abused do.
Yeah. And listen, if you're in a burning building, right, and you realize the building's burning down, will you stay in the building and try and figure out why it's happening and who caused it and why it's on fire? Or do you get out of there and get as far away from there as you can, make sure everything's safe, realize what's going on, and then maybe when you've got yourself set up somewhere in a new home and then you can go, right, let's try figure out what caused that fire. Yeah. But you ain't doing it when the house is burning down. Let's get people out of the house first. Yeah. Before we start trying to figure out who did it. But that's what people want to do. People think you got to stay in the house and figure out who did it. And that's how you get away from the fire. Let's get away. Then maybe one day we can have a look at, like, you know, should we have used the flammable paint that we use on a house or whatever it is, you know?
I get you. And so how do you self-abandon today? I know, and maybe also along with that, like what is your definition of addiction first? What is your definition of addiction?
Yeah, I got to steal it from Gabor Mate again, which is anything that I do for temporary relief that has a
Okay.
negative impact on me in the long run, but that I continue to do anyway. Yeah.
Mm.
And I think everybody's addicted to something, myself included. My phone addiction, for example, is terrible today. So I've had 1,000,001 different addictions since quitting alcohol. I just tend to pick ones that people won't call you out on now. You
Mm.
know, I got addicted to sharing my story publicly when I first started sharing it, you know, and I got addicted to that. I got addicted to helping people. I've been addicted to sugar. I've been addicted to binge eating in general. I've been addicted to restrictive eating. I've been addicted to getting people to like me. I've been addicted to my work. Still can be very much addicted to my work. Addicted to relationships. Addicted to love. There's so many addictions, you know. And I always say this, right? Addiction isn't stigmatized. It's only some addictions that are stigmatized. If you get addicted to alcohol or drugs, you might face stigma. If you get addicted to work, you're just successful. If you get addicted to sport, athletes talk about their addiction all the time. I gave up my life for this. I dedicated my whole life. I'm obsessed with this. Everyone goes, wow, incredible. Right? It's no different.
True.
It's no different. All right. Well, it might be a little bit more healthy, but you know, the person, you know, walking to work will walk past somebody on the streets who's lost everything, you know, lost 2 marriages and because of drink and drugs. And they'll think, why didn't you just stop? And they'll get to their desk at work and look at the pictures on the table of all their families that they've had and let go because they were so addicted to their own work, and they won't realize, why didn't you just stop? And they're not too dissimilar. They're both coming from the same place.
I could see that. I mean, I agree with you that I think everyone's addicted to something. The only variables are what they use and how frequently they use it. But everyone, whether it's social media addiction or relationships, pornography, fill in the blank, right? There are all these addictions at our fingertips now that people will use. And I think just having that humility is important. And if someone really doesn't get it, I would say to them, try going without food and water for 3 to 4 days, and then see, you'll be acting like the heroin addict lunatic, but just without food or water for 3 to 4 days. Like, we all need that. And that's not exactly the same as an addiction, but I just use it as an analogy. But one question I had for you, and maybe I don't know if you know the answer to this, but you had said sharing your story is one of your addictions. Is there a way that comes out differently if it's coming from a place of addiction versus, I don't want to say more genuine, but just maybe more grounded? I'm not sure if you understand the question, but can you tell, is there a difference?
Yeah, I think like in the early days, I shared my story and it felt amazing. It felt like all these people that listened to it saw me, heard me, and I felt like I'd never experienced that. So I was obsessively just wanting to share it any opportunity. And I would go into all that, you know, as much of the depths of the detail as I possibly could to make you go, wow, oh my God, like, how have you got through that? Yeah, that's when I'm sharing my story addictively. You know, like I'll talk about my dad, you know, because my dad, I saw my dad take his own life, right? But I won't just say that. I'll be like, I was a little child and I was here and da-da-da, and I'll share that piece that I just shared with you. It makes sense to share it now because I'm highlighting a point, right? But you asked me about my dad earlier, and there was it didn't feel relevant in the moment to share it with you. If it came up, I would have shared it, right? But I didn't go, I didn't go, my dad died when I was 9. And I was just a small child and I was there and I saw it and did it. You know, when I do that, and I don't really do it anymore because I realized what I was doing, but certainly in the early days, it was way more like, yeah, like how emotional can I make you to make you go, oh my God, like, how did you get through that? Whereas like today I share my story. I actually, if you look at what I do, I don't share my story much at all, really. Like, I'll share it when I'm asked on podcasts in the way that I've been sharing it today, yeah? But it won't be like, how bad can I make it so that you think I'm fucking amazing, you know? It's more like sharing in a general way to help people understand my story and trying to use it for good, you know?
I love that. I think if I had to sum that up, you basically said more performative and reaction seeking.
Exactly that. Exactly that. Yeah. Yeah. If only I could have put it in that couple of sentences.
And this is what people do on social media all the time, though, right? This is where we're all rewarded with, oh, the more performative we are, the more kind of reaction seeking we are, the more attention we get. And then the more it can help the business side of things. And that's a fine line to draw there too, where like in social media, you almost need some clickbaity stuff sometimes. And you can get And also, by the way, like you're the one that introduced me to Christian John, and we talked about some of this stuff a couple times, so I appreciate that. And people should Christian was on Josh's podcast as well. For the people listening to this, check that out too. But he was saying that like going viral, for example, is just like a drug. It can be just like a drug. And it's hard for us too on this end. It's like, okay, where is the balance here? Where am I out of control? Where am I reaction seeking? Where am I just trying to help people? Where am I trying to help the business? Like, where's the line? Where's the balance?
Yeah, and it's a blurred one. It's a blurred one. I mean, a friend of mine calls it vulnerability porn, right? Which is like, and I have to say to people, remember, it is not that vulnerable to sit in a room on my own in front of a camera and talk about my experience. Yeah. Being truly vulnerable or emotionally intimate is being in the presence of somebody that I care about and sharing my story. Yeah. Very, very different.
Very true.
And we can all become like slaves to the algorithm, you know, and people often ask me, you know, how do you think you built such a following in the way that you did? And ultimately, one of the main answers is I just become addicted to going viral. So, you know, but people in the spiritual sphere do this, right? In the spiritual space, the spiritual content creators, they do this, right? They'll go, oh, look at this ego-driven guy just taking pictures of himself with his top off and his abs out. Like, it's just ego-driven. And I'm like, maybe it is, but you bet your life sometimes I make a piece of content because I want to put it out and I want all the likes, and then I post it and then I'm looking to see if it's done well and are people liking it, and let me check the comments. And 100% in that moment, it's nothing but addiction. It's nothing but validation seeking. You know, and I have to be really, really careful that I don't get caught up. You know, people, social media is addicting enough, but when you get, when you've got a big following, and you post and you know that there's loads of these likes coming in and people saying, oh, thank you, it's so amazing what you do, you've helped me so much. You have to be really careful to stay grounded in that. You have to be really careful because there's this balance. I want to help people. It makes me feel great that I help people. My being of service to people is like the thing that lights me up the most. Yeah. And I talked about it right at the beginning of when we started talking. I got to be careful of like power, because power's the most addictive thing in the world, man. Right? It's that, you know, power addiction is at the center of all of the atrocities in the world. So you have to be careful. You have to be careful. And I think you have to have good people around you who keep you grounded, who humble you. You know, it's been really important to me. Again, it comes back to that circle of people around you, you know.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I think it just becomes easy to lose ourselves online, and we can kind of drift in the direction of where we think the likes and views are going to take us. I know I've been guilty of that, where I'll notice I'm kind of losing touch with what I'm about and what my mission is. And I'm kind of chasing the likes, chasing the views. And it's like, is that really what I should be doing? Or is it like, is that really what's best for the most amount of people? Maybe not. It can sometimes be, it can overlap, which is what makes it more tricky, right? It's like, okay, sometimes it touched on something, but other times it's just me being reaction seeking. I want a dopamine spike here. And it's a never ending challenge to have that humility to try to stay grounded.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. You've nailed it, really. It's one of those constant balancing acts and staying grounded and having to check yourself, you know? And it's hard, man, because like you say, you get chased, you chase the views. And like, I do think that sometimes you can use it to your creative advantage, because it's like, how do I make a piece of content where I really say what I want to say, but it's engaging? And so that there is a craft to it. And I do more and more try and look at it as a craft of like, yeah, how do I lean into my creative outlet while reminding people that, like, you know, content, I think we all have a responsibility to remember that all content on social media, all of it, has some level of performance to it. You know, I do my whiteboard posts a lot at the moment. I really enjoy doing them, but they are a creative outlet. You know, they are a performance version of me. I'm trying to be as authentic and as true and all of that as I can, but it's not exactly who I am all of the time. You know, I think we all have days where we feel like crap, right? I have days when I feel like crap and I hate everybody and I'm judgmental and not very nice, right? I'm probably not going to put the camera on and just be like, and be like that in front of people, right? It's just not going to happen. You know, on those days, I either won't make content or you lean back into what you're doing. So again, man, it's you have to be on, on the ball, you know?
And that's part of the balancing act too, right? Having the
Mm,
wisdom to know what's like a good thing to share truly and being like authentic and vulnerable versus am I just trying to turn this into a reaction seeking thing too, right? I'm trying to
yeah.
be this way because I do want this reaction. And I guess that's where learning how to respond rather than react comes in. I mean, that's another thing I learned from,
Hmm.
say, Viktor Frankl or someone like that, right? Just taking that step
Yeah.
back and trying to figure out the best way to act in these cases. But for the people listening, and maybe this is one of the good things to close on here, people that struggle with self abandonment, people that struggle with people pleasing. And I know you had said like sharing your story is the big thing way you escape. And it's kind of a way for you to get your needs met in a way. And right,
Hmm.
Ralph Waldo Emerson said you can't help anyone else without also helping yourself, which I also think is true. But we have to be careful to make sure it's not the self-abandoning version or the people-pleasing version. But what are your suggestions to people out there that are trying to not abandon themselves?
I guess like the one practical thing that I would say is to create space every day that's about coming into your body, being mindful, and about self-reflection. Now, to be clear about that, that doesn't necessarily mean sitting in the lotus position, closing your eyes and humming, right? It might be walking the dog, it might be going to the gym, it might be sport, right? But you need those moments regularly, I would say daily, um, where you've got at least 5-10 minutes. And that's all it needs to be, where you're self-reflecting, where you're like, you're dedicating a piece of time to yourself to just mull things over a little bit, give yourself that little bit of space, check in with yourself. If somebody told you, like we create content, right? And we want to not become the version of ourselves that we don't want to come. So like, I just think about the bit of content that I made yesterday, the way that I was online. Was I being a dick? Was I overreacting? Did I make that piece of content so that I could have a little bit of a dig at somebody and make sure that I am humble enough and have the courage to sometimes be like, yeah, I think that's what I did then. And then not beat myself up about it, but go, okay, so what do I do today? Well, maybe I could make a bit of content that's the opposite to that, you know? And I feel like doing that, and I do that regularly, right? I think doing that is one of the reasons I feel that I have the courage to talk about the real toxic and horrible people in the way that I do, because I'm aware of my own traits, my own difficult traits. I'm aware of them, and I'll sit with anybody and they can call me out on all of them, and I'll reflect, and I will truly try and think, right, am I that, and do I need to work on that? Because in the end, when it comes to toxic people, that's what we're talking about: the ability to self-reflect. And the real toxic, horrible people are the ones that don't do that at all.
Hmm.
And that's the
Uh,
difference.
I think a big thing would also be, as you said, making sure the people that call you out are truly on your team. Because I
Hmm.
think there's a lot of toxic people. They'll probably try to say to you, that's all I'm trying to do for you. I'm just trying to do this for your own good. But there's no emotional safety there. They're the person that's abusing you, but they'll try to act like they're the person that is, oh, I'm just trying to help you out. I'm trying to call you out so I can make you a better version of you. It's like, not really. Like you need that
Yeah.
emotional safety first. You need that connection first for that to even be a thing.
Yeah, totally. Is it Brené Brown that talks about don't listen to anybody that's not in your arena, or is something
I
like
think
that?
so.
Yeah. So like, yeah, listen, I mean, I get absolutely, I get abuse from people every day on social media, right? So I'm not listening to like, you know, like daily comments 87692 on Instagram who ain't got a picture and no followers when he says that you're toxic because you're breaking families apart, right? I'm not reflecting on what they've said to me, right? But like you say, yeah, good people that's that I trust and that have an underbelly of safety, then yeah, I'm gonna listen to them.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm involved in circles and spaces. I got men's group and recovery spaces, and then close friends and stuff where them spaces are created to reflect in that way.
And the other thing you made me think of there, we're in a good place. When we're in a good place, I think that leaves clues. And I think
Mm,
like one of the things I've tried to do is to write down when I'm in a good place, what am I doing? Like what are the
mm,
patterns? And like and also when I'm not in a good place, that leaves clues too. And I usually
mm,
stop doing things. Like if I'm not reading books, that's maybe a good sign. Well, it's not too good. I'm not reading books anymore. And I
yeah.
think it's important to write some of this stuff down because I'm not sure if you've heard this quote, but I think you'll like it. Stephen King said, "We never feel our sanity leaving, we only feel its return." And it's like,
Oh, I
oh.
like that. Yeah, I do like that. You're right. I do like that. Yeah, a lot. Yeah.
And so I found that to be exactly the case, right? When I'm not, I don't know it when I'm in la la land, but that's where the importance of people around us that are
Mm,
good for us to call us out, to kind of pull us back to reality there. And if we have the journaling and things like that, I'm not sure if you're a big advocate of journaling or not, but
yeah.
anything to keep us kind of grounded and attached, I think is good.
Yeah. Totally. Totally agree with you. Yeah.
All right, Josh, where can people find you?
Oh, my website's just joshconnolly.co.uk, but like, Instagram and TikTok, I'm Josh_FFW, and they're probably the main places. And then YouTube as well, which you can all find through my website. So, yeah.
Right on, man. I appreciate you coming on the show so much.
Yeah. Thank you, man. I've really enjoyed it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is going to help a lot of people. So thanks again for coming on.
Good man. Cheers.